Вікторе Володимировичу, цікава історія. От, припустимо,
Guys, can you hear me?
Yes, doctor.
Yes, doctor.
Yes, doctor, I can hear you.
Okay, guys, can you like quickly remind me about what we said last lecture? Can anyone brief us in? Yeah? And I'm going to help. Who is going to fill us in?
Last time we talked about regime change and democracy.
Yeah?
We said that democracy
so this is like our this week's topic. Okay?
Yes, yes.
Go ahead, Malak. Yeah, I'm just helping you.
We mainly talk about, at first we discussed what's democracy.
Yeah.
And we said that democracy may be described as all candidates, for example, have the same chance to win.
Mm-hmm.
And that people feel representative. And so on. We gave a lot of we reached a definition at the end for democracy.
No, this is like the first thing.
It, but
yeah,
I'm
this
saying
is the
what
first.
I remember.
Yeah, this is what we did. Like the first thing we start out with last lecture. We offered some definitions to democracy and what democracy really means, and what democratic regime actually means, or how it functions. And then
yes.
The most
we talked
important,
about the structure.
The thing is, as I mentioned, like each team we're going to investigate and we need to look into or examine in some detail. Like the theme in itself raises some theoretical questions, and we need to examine how the literature or the existing studies actually tackle these theoretical questions. So we are dealing with like 5 main questions. The first thing is the structure, whether or not we can there is a need, to structural prerequisites in order to establish a democratic or to install democratic regime in the first place. And we singled out like one puzzling and highly contested issue in the existing literature, whether or not economic conditions and economic crisis affect in a way or another regime change, and whether or not in one particular directions, like democratic breakdown, democratic regimes are much more vulnerable to economic crisis to be broken down. Or it might lead to transition. And we examined, this trend in the existing literature. And then we stopped at like these structural preconditions, and these may offer some sort of background conditions or carried structural potential for establishing or installing a democratic regime. But like these structural explanations do not really do not really tell us more about the process itself, how like political elites that they actually engineered historically democratic transitions and facilitated and paved the way to establish to this transition from authoritarianism, how they actually recognized and realized these structural potentials in order to introduce and to push for like democratic transitions. So I'm going to explain in some detail. I'm going to give like a general idea about what we said about this agency-based or agency choices explanations in the existing literature, and then we will move to like the cultural explanation and whether or not we can distinguish between like causal forces and causal mechanisms that led to the establishment of the democratic regimes, and the causal mechanisms that would help with the endurance and the persistence and consolidation of these regimes. So we started last time talking about elite choices and agency-based explanations by like interrogating or explaining in some detail what O'Donnell and Schmitter actually mentioned about pact making, and how the like democratic regimes actually stem from this prolonged and inconclusive political struggle between social and political opposition and old regime incumbents or dominant centers or power centers in the authoritarian regimes, and how like the divisions within the elite camps led to like the creation of two camps with the emergence of softliners and hardliners here in the elite camp. And with regard to oppositions, there are like extremists and moderates. And then in some cases, basically Spain, cases in Southern Europe and Latin America, so basically Spain and Colombia and Venezuela, softliners of the regime managed to get along or to reach to agree on terms of transition with the moderate opposition by limiting the policy space and the policy agenda and pushing for regime transition. Whether or not how like elite fractions came into being and how they reached this agreement or concluded this like pact agreements, or they agreed on establishing or making this transition from authoritarianism to democratic regimes. In some cases, like social and increasing social mobilization and social opposition led to this elite fraction. So that's why it's reasonable to situate, this mass mobilization, this mass mobilization and rising social opposition within the same rational choice framework that led to this pact-making exercise in order to push for democratization or regime transitions. So Michael Macfall mentioned something like about like the transition in East Europe. It didn't actually follow this pact-making exercise between softliners and moderate oppositions, but you need to examine in some detail the balance of power between rising oppositions and political elites or authoritarian ruling elites. In some countries, this mass mobilizations gave way to decisive power advantage to opposition groups or like the opposition to the Communist Party in former Soviet states. And this actually enabled political opposition to impose their terms of transition. And they didn't actually have to limit, the policy agenda as O'Donnell and Schmitter argued for. So the thing is how they made this negotiated transition and they reached this compromise. In order to reach, like to make this agreement and to reach this compromise over how to exercise power, how to enable the winner of the transitional or the founding elections to exercise power or to govern freely without disturbing without initiating any kind of disturbing action. And with the winner, the winners have to abide by the rules of the game, that they might be like people like may hold them accountable for their doing or for any wrongdoings, and they might be voted out of office in the subsequent elections. So they called it like contingent consent, like the parties that entered these kind of pacts and agreed on the rules of the game, it's contingent on this ongoing consent between different actors and different players. So in order to reach this agreement, so they had to converge on specific issues. So they have to exclude issues that they couldn't reach or make any kind of reconciliation regarding these issues, for example, like territorial claims or social and economic redistributive measures. So that's why they relegated this to the margin, or they marginalized these issues that are inherently insoluble, and they focused on the issues that they can reach a compromise and they can reach an agreement on, how to distribute.
Doctor?
Yeah.
I'm really sorry, but Hagar has someone to join us.
Oh, okay. So like they had like this agreement on financial resources, ministerial and cabinet posts, how to reach this kind of power sharing mechanism, and at the end of the day, they settled for actors would settle for their second best solution. It's not a zero-sum game. It's a sum game in a way or another. In order, they had like this mentality or this mindset in order to install a democratic regime and to extricate the military, or enable the military to withdraw from the political scene and to hand over power to civilians. This actually, like the prominent examples, happened with the conservative forces and the leftist forces when they reached an agreement in order to facilitate transition in Spain, what became what's known as Moncloa Pact. And in Brazil, for example, when the military initiated what they called decompression plan, Hiesel plan, in order to hand over power gradually to civilian forces, and they created like two they created like enabled two parties to function in the political sphere in order to enable this transition to civilian governance gradually. One actually related to the military junta and to the generals in order to protect their prerogatives and to give them safe exit, and the other one was representative or offered like avenues for representation for emerging social movements and white social oppositions. And in order to do that, they excluded extremist and basically radical communist and radical forces that they had like this zero-sum mentality, and they didn't need to exclude any issues from the policy agenda. This pact might entail, like in some pacts, like these pacts actually entail some coalitional elements, like how to build like cross-ideological coalition, or to have like this coalition government between the old forces and the new forces, and others actually they didn't have any sort of coalitional elements. But actually, the crux of the matter here, how to cajole non-democrats and people or political elites that they actually didn't endorse or adopt these kind of democratic behavior in order to enter, this kind of newly democratic framework, or this pact-making framework. According to Dankwart Rasto, he mentioned something about like democracy can be installed from this framework with agency choices. So democracy elites can engineer and facilitate democratic transitions without genuinely believing in these democratic values and these democratic norms. And by like routinizing these kind of practices of like handing over power and abiding by the electoral games and or electoral results and the rules of the game, and the rationalization of the process, that they might settle for the second best outcome or solution, but they still like better off, or they can drive some payoffs from the existing regime if we compare this to authoritarian regimes. So he made like this argument, like democracy without democrats, like democracy can be installed without having democratic forces, but through these processes of rationalization and routinized practices, they might get accustomed to these democratic norms and these democratic culture, and then eventually they enable what he mentioned, like habituation phase, like citizens even would believe in this democratic norms and like tolerance, civic culture, and accepting others, imposing rules on existing government or on elites in order to prevent any kind of transgression against outgroups or against any opposition. So people, like by rationalizing and routinizing these practices, they will absorb, or they will actually endorse these norms over time. So like having democratic, so the central point here, it's a distinction between citizens' values and elites' values, and each stage has its own rules and logic. So the first stage with elites bringing about or installing democratic rules, they don't actually need to adopt, these kind of cultural democratic norms and values, but they actually need to lay the groundwork for institutional institutional configurations or institutional settings that would allow, this democratic regime to function and to operate effectively. And by abiding by these rules, and this would enable elites and then citizens to absorb and to adopt these norms eventually. So this would raise a question about whether or not cultural norms and cultural values are essential or prerequisite or a cause for installing democratic regime, or it's actually result from establishing these democratic regimes after all. So if I ask you guys, do you think democratic culture or cultural values are one essential step, this step has to precede the installation of democratic regime, or it might follow or come later after these processes of rationalization and adaptation? So when people get adapted to this, will embrace these norms, like elites and citizens.
I think يا دكتور لو culture of the people إن هم يعني they have to engage in politics more, they will engage in democracy. But if the culture is not يعني إن هم ما يكونش عندهم أي engagement في political system بتاعهم، يبقى هم مش
Okay,
هيparticipate في
so
الديمقراطية خالص.
you agree with them on the idea that it's elite values and norms are separable from citizenry values and norms, right?
Yes.
Okay. So this actually will take us to one important question, just to make like this analytical distinction between the mechanisms that lead to the installation of democratic regimes and the mechanisms that actually enable and facilitate the persistence of democratic regimes. And like central to this question is the centrality or the position of the cultural norms. So the existing literature, like modernization theory, and still like part and parcel of like this capitalist development and repercussions and social transformation of economic development, they may argue that affluent and educated citizens in this system, like citizens will adopt or adapt more, adjust to these civic and liberal values in order to sort out or to resolve their conflict peacefully without resorting to violence. They are tolerant and like acceptable to outgroups. They have to abide by the rules of the law, and like they believe in this reconciliation and peaceful resolution of any conflict. So this is like one strand in the existing literature, and the other strand the focuses mainly on the role of religion and basically like this kind of deep-rooted convictions, religious convictions. So one prominent trend as well argues against the role of Islam. Like Islam as a religion is incompatible with this liberal democratic values because of the position of the individual that they don't have. They adopt this kind of conformist behavior, and when it comes to state religion relationship is not clear, unlike Western Europe, for example, that there is kind of a clear separation with this secular tendencies. They had like this clear separation between the church and the state, but Islam, with the existence of Sharia law and people genuinely believe in the application of these laws to their daily lives and to govern their own behaviors. So they actually it's God, these kind of Sharia, it's like God's laws, so they cannot like manipulate or they cannot get around. So that's why it's very difficult to install democratic regimes in these countries. So religious cultures and beliefs in and of religion in and of itself. And same argument made, by the way, regarding Catholicism, like this kind of Catholic hierarchy like instilled this authoritarianism even in spiritual matters, and this will be withdrawn to the public affairs as well. So unlike they compare Catholicism with Protestant, for example, like Protestants are, they adopt like much more individualistic culture. That is, this culture is basically and intrinsically nonconformist, and they encourage people to participate and to contest even this kind of authority or hierarchical authority. So that's why they are much more prone or inclined to to adopt these democratic values more than Catholicism. But this is actually changed over time. And in Confucian culture in China, for example, they made this claim, like this kind of belief in dictation and top-down approach. This actually trained or routinized citizens and people to submit or to subdue themselves to central authority, to general authority, that they have to abide and to comply with their dictation and orders. So that's why it's incompatible, culturally incompatible with a pluralistic democratic framework and this kind of pluralist participatory interaction. But they didn't deny, the fact that this kind of cultural norms can be changed over time, as it happened with Catholicism, for example. So I have like question for you guys. Do you believe like when it comes to this habituation process or phase, like if elites actually introduced these kind of democratic institutions or democratic governance, people will get adjusted to these new norms and these new behaviors, and they will eventually internalize these norms and behave and these norms and values and behaviors, and they will eventually accept democracy as a mode of governance. So if I ask you from what we said so far, so what's the crucial, if you have like an example in your mind or you have something in your head, so what do you think, what's the crucial element in democratic transition or regime collapse, like for regime bringing about democratic or facilitating democratic transition? What's the crucial factor or the crucial element? If you have like an empirical example or empirical evidence in your mind, can you just elaborate on this, like saying what's the crucial, the most important element in democratic transition, and then how it operates in the case you have? This question is part of the lecture, so please give me some reflections and thoughts.
I think to achieve democracy, we have to balance between the
Okay.
elite interests and the citizens' interests.
Okay, so let's start with first, what kind of what's the example or what's the case you need to explain in some detail or to look into?
Doctor, can we talk about Tunisia? And
Yeah, that was the question I actually have in my mind, and actually this is one of the questions you have for your one of the topics for your term papers. Okay, so Mohammed, can you tell us, you know, what happened there, and then from the story, how can we elaborate on the crucial and the essential factor or cause that actually led to smooth transition there? Mohammed? Can you hear me? Guys, can you hear me?
Yes, doctor.
Okay, yeah. So anyone? Malak?
Yes, doctor.
Yeah, go ahead. If you need to apply this to the Tunisian case, how can we elaborate on this?
Doctor, I think the event of when, like before the uprising or the revolution that happened in Tunisia, there was an incident where someone set themselves on fire. I think
Yeah.
that was the turning point.
Heidi, I can't hear you.
The incident where a citizen set themselves on fire, that was the turning point that gave a head start to the revolution that then caused the regime to collapse?
Yeah. So this is like the collapse of the old regime, but how democratic regime was installed there, or the new regime got installed in Tunisia. So this is what we are investigating right now. So you see, guys, you have like so many details when you have like some facts, and you need actually to, you have to be like much more precise when it comes to your research question or your puzzling question. So these are like, you know, the triggering events, or like the background conditions against which, you know, the process is actually, or the episodes from these episodes of contention, these episodes eventually led to the collapse of the Ben Ali's regime, and brought about or paved the way for the establishment of new democratic rule or new democratic regime. So actually, so we are investigating what happened after the collapse of authoritarianism, or the breakdown of the authoritarian regime there, and then how we have like so many explanations, but we here focus on agency-based or cultural explanation. So how can we apply these explanations, these theoretical formulations, to the Tunisian case? Heidi, can you continue on, like giving more details?
I'm not very sure about the information, but I think after the revolution,
Yeah, go ahead.
they made changes to the laws, or they changed fundamental laws, and they had a new government. And after 6 months, they changed it, and they had new elections until they found the regime that fits them the most, I think.
Yeah, but so elite choices here, the choices here were crucial. Okay, so how they actually they didn't have any kind of pact with Ben Ali's cronies or the old regime. So they actually, the different oppositions from across the ideological or the political spectrum, from different ideological backgrounds, they managed to get together and to have like cross-ideological alliance in order to converge on specific issues regarding constitutional writing, regarding the new legal engineering. How can we the Constituent Assembly that would write the new constitution? What kind of regime type or regime form, political system we are going to have, or electoral system, majoritarian or proportional representations? And then they opted for proportional representations that would allow for different forces from different ideological backgrounds, or from different ideological forces to have some representation in the process of the constitution writing. So they enabled different forces, different ideological forces from within the opposition camp to have some sort of representation in the new democratic regime, and to have stake in perpetuating and preserving the gains they actually gained from that. And the most the central element, or the central feature here is like this kind of troika that they managed to, Islamist or Nahda party, they managed to get along, or to form a coalition or cross-ideological alliance with like leftist forces, Al-Takaful and Democratic Party, in order to stabilize the new democratic regime, and to enable, you know, the processes of constitution writing, and like the legal engineerings to get like fully crystallized. So here, agency choices are essential in order to stabilize or to install the new democratic rules. And after that, some political assassinations happened, with some sort of social polarization, some sort of rising social opposition and deepening social polarization started to emerge in Tunisia after the political assassination of some leftist and leftist forces that like pushed or gave way to other extremists to elaborate other demands like integrating Sharia law into the new constitution. And like on the other hand, secular forces, they started to mobilize against this cross-ideological alliance. So this actually started to destabilize the entire political system and to actually push it on erode like the legitimate basis of the legitimate the unified basis upon which the new regime actually was established. So again, agency choices here were crucial when the government or the partners of the same coalition in the Troika government, they accepted to engage in a national dialogue process with other forces, join in order to resolve the conflict, the social conflict, and to manage the crisis. So what happened? Actually, they didn't. They adopted this self-restrained approach, and they participated in the national dialogue, and they eventually agreed to hand over power peacefully to a technocratic government in order to mitigate or to prevent any kind of escalation of the crisis there. So actually here agency choices are like very clear. But if I ask you back to our question, like cultural elements or agency choices. So what do you think, guys? There is no like it's debatable, and I need to hear more about your reflections on this. So any thoughts like agency choices or cultural norms? And
I think
elite's culture is separable from citizens' culture? Yeah? Mohammed, you want to say something?
I think in Tunisia it was agency choices,
Okay.
but in countries where مثلا في establishment military rule او military dictatorship، هنا ممكن يبقى في نوع من الكالتشر عند الاليتس ان هو خلاص كده هي دي الحاجه اللي عندنا، فممكن هنا يكون في دور للكالتشر بتاعتهم مثلا.
In Tunisia?
لا، في دول تانية زي مثلا دول زي مثلا تشيلي او دول كان فيها military dictatorship.
Also, you mentioned something about previous regime, like the authoritarian type that would affect like the cultural norms or the attitudes of leaders that actually engineer transition. But you know what happened in Chile? They experienced this like military dictatorship under Pinochet, but the like old forces that they had like historical hostility against each other, they managed to get together and they formed like a center-left coalition in order to dislodge Pinochet.
Yes.
But this is like one important fact. But here it's kind of off topic as well. This is what I'm training you in something. When you answer, like when you have a question, when you pose like a research question or a puzzle, just try to focus only on the puzzle.
Okay.
To what extent this piece of information would help you. So perhaps here you focus on its choices that is actually the elite choices that they are not, the choices are not that they are inseparable from their cultural norms, and these cultural norms actually byproduct of like long heritage of communication between different ideological forces, absence of this kind of pact making or accommodation stand war with Ben Ali's or like Ben Ali, like it's one dominant party regime. So with the legacy of they had with their cooperation with each other, so they developed these like cultural and democratic norms in order to resolve their conflicts peacefully, and they had like this reconciliatory orientation or attitudes towards crisis management or conflict resolution, right?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So it's elite choices, and like perhaps like from these choices, this is what Rostov would argue. Like with these elite choices, regardless of, we don't really care about whether or not they genuinely believe in these democratic norms, or they made this kind of choices strategically in order to in order actually to enable the establishment of the new democratic regime that they would drive, some benefits from the new democratic regime. So it's kind of a strategic calculations. So we don't, Asians' choices, they don't really care about, these cultural norms. And they don't really, according to this model, the model actually doesn't care about, citizens' norms and behavior as well. Because according to this model, people like citizens ultimately would adopt these democratic norms and democratic practices, and they will get adapted and adjusted to these new practices and new routines, and they would rationalize these new practices that would help eventually with their endorsement or with the embracement of these democratic norms and behavior. So it's kind of, I just need to your thoughts on this. Like I don't have like a
Doctor,
correct answer, but do you think that they are separable, and this argument is really sound, Malak?
yes, can I add something?
Yeah.
But I searched for it, and it's not all from my own. I
Yeah.
think that also culture is important, not only agency, as the constitution of Tunisia was, يعني, it became democratic because it adopted a lot of cultural cases. Like it, for example, يعني, guarantees women to be a part of the political body, and they established that the country, or the Tunisian country, is an Islamic one, but at the same time they give the freedom for people to يعني, choose whatever religion, يعني, religious freedom.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind
And
of,
yes,
it's
they
actual
also
choice.
protect the civil liberties.
Yeah, this is again like
So,
how can we put this, or like how this would fit into the model. It's with this kind of it's not a pact, but within the opposition camp, it's not a pact with the soft liners of the old regime. But if they manage to establish, this kind of cross ideological um, alliance or pact among themselves as oppositional forces, so they had to converge on some matters, like when it comes to identity, for example, or including Sharia law into the or integrating, this article about Sharia law into the new constitution. So they have to actually exclude extremists from this democratic bargain in order to proceed with, or in order to converge on specific elements, and to limit, the policy agenda on reconcilable issues or negotiable issues. If it's not like negotiable, or would trigger like hostility and disputes and animosity between different forces, so they actually marginalized these issues from like they didn't reduce, the policy space or limit the policy agenda to these issues, and they focus more on other issues to converge on. Okay, so it's part of like elite choices as well. And again, like the existence of other forces, that they have representation in the new institutional setting, that they have different ideological predispositions and different worldview. Okay, so this is like, again, like elite's culture or elite's norms, and how they actually engineered like the new legal and constitutional setting, and how they establish and bring forth democratic or institutionalized institutional rules for the future, for future rounds of elections, or for to solve their future disputes. So they agreed on particular mechanisms that would serve as a coordinating device between them to resolve any kind of disputes, and to be in a way or another self-reinforcing. But again, people's culture, like citizens' culture, What do you think about that? So the crucial factor or the essential element in like bringing or enabling regime transitions, the crucial element here is like elite strategic behavior and agency choices, focusing mainly or exclusively on elites from like old regime or from rising social opposition and political opposition. And how can we situate like citizens? Like here, like habituation, would come later. So imagine as like you as a citizen, the ideas you hold or the political culture actually you have, or the cognitive orientations and this kind of level of knowledge and emotional relationship with the political regime or with the operation of the political regime. It doesn't matter, and what matters more, elite choices.
I think if the ideas surrounding me يعني support that I should maintain the regime or يعني the dominant regime, and there is no any ideas about the transition of the regime, so I will support the existing regime, and I will not think to any يعني مش هفكر ان الرجيم يتغير.
Okay, so you agree on the idea, right? On this adaptability and rationalization of the specific practices and behavior.
Yes.
It's made by mainly by political elites, right?
Yes, yeah, doctor.
Okay, any more thoughts or reflections on this?
It's not only. I don't think it's only elite choices. I mean, this way, if we say it's only elite choices, then we're stripping away the agency of the citizens or their ability to choose or accept or reject changes.
But Salma, we are focusing on the transition moment, this particular moment of installing a new regime or establishing a new regime. You can have a say in the process or in decision making by casting a ballot in the elections. You can hold politicians accountable for their policies or for their actions in future rounds of elections. So you have a say. You can participate in a democratic framework. Like you can participate in civic associations or take part in public deliberation and public discussions in order to express your opposition or your opinion, generally speaking. So you have a say in a way or another. But we are talking about like this particular moment of making or enabling transition from authoritarianism to another regime that doesn't necessarily, like it's not like necessary, it doesn't have to follow like particular progressive path or linear path towards like installing democracy. But like imagining like this in Tunisia, like the regime breakdown or the regime collapse that actually gave way to intense interactions between different political forces, and from these interactions they installed another, they actually rewrote like their constitution, and they agreed on particular electoral rules and institutional settings, and eventually they enabled this smooth or regime transition in Tunisia. So in this particular moment, according to Rosto model, you don't, neither elites nor you had to genuinely believe in these democratic norms or democratic behaviors, like a strategic behavior of these elites who participated in the negotiation and establishing the new regime. Like these matter more than your norms and values, and your norms and values will come later by like participating in politics and participating in elections and public deliberations and like having activities in the public sphere, you will like embrace and endorse these at later stage. You will endorse these democratic norms and democratic practices. So you see the difference?
Yes, I was a bit confused, so thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this is like a puzzling or a debatable issue to think about. But anyway, for those who are going to write their term paper on the topic, this would be like food for thought for them. Okay. So we covered so far structural explanation, centrality of economic crisis or economic conditions, and to what extent they exert independent causal power, or they interact, that we have to put this in conjuncture with other variables. And then these structural factors give us like a good account or good explanations of the conditions under which, or the background conditions that give way to democratic process, democratic transitions, but actually they don't tell us more about actors' choices and strategic behaviors. So that's why we focus on elite, like agency-centric or agency-based explanations with the pact making or the balance of power between old incumbents and political oppositions, and then Rostov model in this about different phases and stages of democratic transition, with this separation between transition moment or elite choices that would enable transition, and then the habituation process that focus the phase that actually focuses on citizens' values and behavior that would enable democratic regimes to persist over time. So we have like another one of the theoretical explanations or the theoretical approach we talked about and we covered actually in the first half of the course is historical institutionalism. If you remember James Mahoney argument about path dependency and critical junctures in Central America. And here we focus on how historical institutionalism would help us understand the the establishment and the persistence of political democracy in Costa Rica. So we focus mainly here on the case of Costa Rica. Can you guys remind me about that? This is like from institutionalism week, neo-institutionalism week, when we talk about rational choice and sociological and historical institutionalism. Okay, so let me, can you remind now? Do you remember now? Can you remind me about what we talked about, like the central components and elements of historical institutionalism? And here in this topic, how we can apply this to the establishment of political democracy. So if you remember, we were talking about the outcome variable here, why some countries like witnessed this military authoritarianism, El Salvador and Guatemala, and other countries witnessed reenactment of traditional or traditional dictatorship or personal dictatorship, like Nicaragua and Honduras, and then why Costa Rica like stood out for its installation of political democracy or democratic regime. Okay, so I can give you like some information to help you remember that. So we talked about at this antecedent conditions focus mainly on this division between conservative and liberals, and they actually disagreed over, or they had like deep and fierce disputes over privatization of agricultural lands. So they needed, like liberals, they needed to initiate far-reaching reforms in order to commercialize the agricultural sector and to get integrated into the global market, and basically in the coffee sector, that they had like some sort of economic advantage with this sector. So they need to get integrated into the global market by increasing the productivity of this sector, and to privatize lands in order to increase productivity and to get integrated into the international market. So they disagreed over the scope of land privatization, so how to transform these communal lands into private properties or privatized ones. So they agreed on the scope and the size, whether or not we can extensively privatize all communal and public-owned lands, or we focus mainly on like partial privatization rather than full or extensive privatization. And the size of estates that would be privatized, large estates only, or small estates as well can be privatized. So from this agreement, these disagreements between liberal and conservative forces, here we single out, the case of Costa Rica. So when it comes to the scope of privatization, so they enabled, extensive privatization measures of, but only for small estates. So this had like this critical juncture of adopting this kind of radical or gradual reforms. It carried over into like different periods or historical periods of this structural persistence and reactive sequence, with the emergence of popular mobilization and in some countries social polarization in rural areas between different classes, and the emergence of pro-democracy movements. But the antecedent conditions and the choices made at the critical juncture were essential and persisted into these phases and eventually led to the particular outcome, which is military authoritarianism, democracy, our theoretical interest now, or traditional dictatorship. So what happened in Costa Rica comparing to other countries? So with this, at this critical juncture, by making choices of enabling or passing these privatization measures, and that actually applied only to small states. So this led to the massive expansion of commercial agriculture and integration into the global market. And this gave way to a new political or landed elites that they had a stake in the liberal reform period and the liberal reform measures, and then they had like a stake in the continuity and in perpetuating, these reforms, and they gained control over political power, and this like went in tandem with modernizing state apparatuses and creating a particular administrative structure there. But what happened in Costa Rica compared to other cases, here they didn't invest in powerful military coercive apparatuses, and they didn't witness this like a deepening or heightening polarized context in rural areas. So in rural areas, the class structures remained kind of stable, and they didn't witness any kind of class mobilization that gave way to guerrilla wars. Guys, can you mute the voice? Or someone is asking me. Okay. Guys, can you mute the voice? Okay, guys, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, doctor.
Yeah, okay, solid. yeah, let's move on. So actually here, what happened, this like emergence of this rural class structures in basically in Guatemala and El Salvador, this like the give way to like guerrilla warfare, as we mentioned before, and like the existence of repressive and strong military coercive apparatuses in these countries like enabled authoritarian regimes to entrench itself. But what happened in Costa Rica, it didn't go like the same path or the same didn't follow the same trajectory. So it didn't witness what happened in Costa Rica in these like with these antecedent conditions, with this divisions between liberals and conservatives over the scope and the intensity and the scale of privatized lands. These like elite conflict gave way to liberal enactment of liberal reform measures, reform measures in a sense of commercializing coffee sector and to some extent banana sectors, and getting incorporated into the international market. But here, with the emergence of pro-democracy movement and counter-reform movement, with counter-reform movement, I mean the anti-liberal reform movement that initiated like this kind of privatization and commercialization of the agricultural sector. And Costa Rica, instead of with modernizing the state apparatus, it enabled as well the emergence of some civic associations and the formation of some political parties. So these are like, the foundation or the structural persistence that actually emanated from, guys, can you mute the voice? I can like scroll down the names and I can see. Okay. So with this kind of oligarchical, so what happened with this kind of reactive, with these kind of reactive sequences here in this phase, reactive sequence phase, with the emergence of pro-democracy movement. So now in Costa Rica, we don't have like social polarization in the rural areas, and we don't have like a strong military coercive apparatus. So what happened at this phase? Some social mobilization started to emerge in urban areas from urban workers, and in a way, to some extent, in banana plantations. But still, like in rural areas, this didn't give way to any kind of guerrilla or insurgency groups to flourish. Now, liberal elites or liberal people who were affiliated with this liberal reform period, they ran the country, and some oligarchical factions started to oppose the existing political establishment, or to have like to defect from this oligarchical camp and to object or to oppose certain policies, especially those applied by Calderon. Starting from 1940s. So elite factions from within oligarchical camp or oligarchical group. So this oligarchical factions started to appeal or to reach out to the excluded and unrepresentative sectors that started to mobilize in urban areas, basically urban workers and workers in banana plantations. So they had like some objection, or they opposed Calderon's policies regarding to like social reform policies on the one hand, and during that period it was like the Second World War, and he tried to instill this like anti-access sentiments, and like initiated policies that actually discriminated against access forces and basically Germans, and this actually triggered some fears from the existing some fears of the well-established economic elites, that they closed, like this way they closed off some markets, and they were skeptical about his ability, Calderon as a president, his ability to maintain, you know, this integration into the global market, and with regard to like coffee, the commercial sectors and the coffee processing. So they objected, you know, they had like other objections with regard to the composition of the legislature as well. So they started to actually to form like to split from the existing like oligarchical establishment, and they created their own faction, and they appealed to the excluded, the rising social opposition. So now counter-reform movements started to emerge, unlike other countries, as it happened in El Salvador and Guatemala, basically with the emergence of this social polarization and the class structure in the rural areas that enabled guerrilla groups and insurgency movements to emerge. So here it's the oligarchical faction is part of the counter-reform movement or the counter-reform group. So what happened? What do you guess? Like one oligarchical element in like reform or counter-reform movement, they needed like to establish, to change like some sort of social policies and to bring about some political changes in the existing institutions. So that's why being like having oligarchical element within this movement, this actually moderated or offered like moderate reform agenda, and they pushed for change from within the existing institutional channels, like legislative means or electoral means. So they asked for more guarantees for clean and transparent elections. They asked for, they objected like basically landed elites and commercial elites. They objected, you know, some social legislations, and they needed to reverse it from within the institutionalized channels and basically the legislature. So things escalated with the emergence of like Communist Party, or with the Communist Party tried to develop its own political platform or its own political program that actually was predicated on anti-fascism, nationalism, and social reforms. So the communists, they started to appeal to excluded and unrepresented groups, basically the urban workers and urban social middle class. So in order to stabilize this, the elite orientation, in order to prevent the country or to keep the country from the existing regime from collapsing, so they reached out, like Calderon party, PNR, they reached out to the Communist Party under this heading of national unity. So they actually expanded this liberal reform coalitions, and they expanded electoral politics in order to stabilize the entire regime. So this actually, it's part and parcel of maintaining or keeping, you know, these kind of political solution intact, and preventing the country from like descending into civil war or giving way to insurgency groups to emerge or to give them like a boost. And the counter-reform movements as well, with now like the Communist Party aligned itself with the political establishment or with the liberal forces, oligarchical forces in power. The counter-reform movements from oligarchical factions and from anti-communist intellectuals, they actually got together in order to pressure the existing regime. So the oligarchical elements, they had like the Democratic Party and the National Unity Party, and they managed to get together in order to unify their challenge or their struggle against the liberal reformers. and anti-communist intellectuals, they formed their own political party, PSD, the Social Democratic Party, and they asked for some role, the anti-communist, but they asked for some role of the state in economic and social matters. With the emergence of this pro-democracy movements and counter-reform movements that actually contested the liberal oligarchical forces in power, the breaking point happened in 1948 elections. So in 1946, the PNR, actually the same from the same political establishment, Picado actually maintained power, and like oppositions or the counter-reform movements, they had some claims or they had some doubts about how transparent and the clean the elections were. So they had like some sort of doubts about fraudulent elections and electoral frauds happened in 1946. So in 1948, so they started to mobilize and to organize a nationwide and a general strike in order to pressure the liberal elites or the liberal reformers in order to offer legal and constitutional guarantees to have like clean and fair elections that would enable counter-reformers to reach power or to have representation within the existing political institutions and within the existing institutional configurations. So what happened? The opposition, they got what they asked for. The counter-reform movement or the opposition, they had like their own appointed electoral tribunal council in order to supervise the elections and in order to guarantee its the processes of counting and recounting and the declaration of the results. So what happened? This like opposition appointed council declared split vote. It was like concurrent elections. So what happened? The opposition won the presidential race, and the liberals or the existing political elites of the old liberal reformers, they won the majority of the legislature or the parliamentary elections with like increasing seats to the communists that actually formed an alliance with the PNR. What happened was like disputes over the results, and people like opposition started to declare their resignation from the tribunal council, and they actually had some concerns over and they had their own doubts about the counting process and the destruction of some ballot boxes before the process actually continued or ended. So the reformers dominated parliament or legislature reversed the election results and the presidential elections results, and they actually announced they annulled these results that eventually led to the dissolution of the tribunal council and the initiation of a short period of civil war between the counter reformers and liberal reformers forces that eventually led to the victory of the PSD and PUN, the counter-reformers, from the intellectuals and the oligarchical factions that actually disputed and disagreed with the existing establishment. And again, with this heritage and legacy of having like civic associations and having these kind of processes of reconciliation and compromise between different elite factions, and having these organizational basis with the affiliation with political parties, they had one common goal, which was like overturning liberal reformers. But after like disposing or winning, this war, so they had like to negotiate with the old regime in order to lay down arms, in order to agree on terms of transition. And they started the partners of the same coalition of the same counter-reform movements. So the opposition started to disagree over. It's a normal course of action. Like when you have like a common goal while mobilizing people or having like a fight against particular political forces. So after, like, they are ideologically heterogeneous, with some oligarchical elements. They have like some moderate orientation, and some intellectuals that they have like some other orientation with regard to economic and social policies. So they started to disagree over the processes of the constitution writing, the representation of the constituent assembly, and with the PSD. Mainly, actually, they undertook some nationalization measures. They kept the coffee sector and the commercial sector in place, but they nationalized the financial sectors. They nationalized some banks, which actually triggered some angers from within the oligarchical faction. So eventually, this anti-communist and intellectuals that represented in the PSD prevailed, and they managed to undertake their the new constitutional measures, or to engineer the new constitutional and legal rules in order to establish and to maintain, sustain this political democratic rules. And here Figueres in the photo, like this is like one very famous photo, like within the process of establishing new political democratic regime and writing a new constitution. They decided, to abolish, the national army. And here but you don't see like the it's in Spanish here under beneath the photo. It's the hammer blow. He actually smashed, Via Vista Barracas, with the smashing the wall with the hammer. This is very famous picture that actually they call it like the hammer blow that made history in Costa Rica. And he kept like some civil guards to assume the role or the responsibility of the armies as well. He kept it in place. So from this story, like the antecedent, this kind of antecedent conditions of liberal reforms that eventually at the critical juncture that introduced some privatization measures and led to the integration of the coffee sector or the agricultural sector into the global market, it gave way to mobilization and rising social opposition in Central America, including Costa Rica. But Costa Rica actually diverged, or it had like a different political track or pathway. And this you need to examine here at this moment of pro-democracy movement, how the unity of the political elites and their organizational basis or ideological orientation helped with maintaining, the same processes of like the same way of institutional means of conflict resolution, despite the fact of the emergence or the eruption of this brief period of civil war there. So the pro-democracy movement managed actually to sustain or to establish political democracy in Costa Rica that actually extended to future historical or different periods in future. Okay.
Yes, Hazel.
Okay, guys. So again, we study these themes, these thematic topics. We have like the four major theoretical schools or theoretical approaches or frameworks in the first half, and then we have like some thematic topics in order to see what kind of theoretical questions these thematic topics actually brought, and how existing literature or existing studies answered these theoretical questions by like borrowing some sort of theoretical approaches from structuralism, rational choice, neo-institutionalism, or culturalism. With this topic, we started out with structural explanations or structural preconditions that are pretty much related to the modernization theory and capitalist development and its implications for social structures and class power. Meso level of analysis, institutional rules, parliamentary, presidential, electoral rules, whatever. And then the the dependency or the international structure as well, economically and politically, would affect, you know, the democratic transitions or the installation of democratic regimes. And then we focused on the economic crisis or particular economic conditions and its their effect on bringing about democratic breakdown or installing new democratic regimes. And then we, from the shortcomings of these structural, the heavy focus on structural elements or prerequisites, and from some empirical contestation as well, like democracy emerged in unfavorable circumstances in Latin America during the third wave of democratization as well. So this enabled some scholars to fill in the existing gaps by focusing on agency-based choices and offering, you know, agency-based explanations. O'Donnell and Schmitter and Macfall are like the prominent explanations in these traditions. And then like a standalone explanation with the historical institutionalism, as I mentioned, and I think Margaret Levy mentioned this before, it doesn't have like historical institutionalism, it doesn't have like strong applications in comparative politics, but we studied before James Mahoney article, and we applied, and we actually had like kind of we zoomed in on the Costa Rican case here in order to examine how critical junctures and path dependency ultimately gave way to the persistence or the sustainability of political democracy there, despite the fact of witnessing a short period of civil war in the late 40s. Okay.
Okay, doctor.
Okay, guys. So next time we still have like 2 more topics relating to the state and society, and then state and market. In the next like 2 weeks, we are going to cover these 2 topics. But for now, guys, and I'm going to write this on Moodle, you have to select your the topic for your term paper. So you have to start reading about your topic from now. I extended the deadline for that, but you have to. This is to offer you some room, you know, to give you some time to read and to actually to process the information thoroughly. So you have to select your the topics of your term papers at the most by the next week.
Okay, doctor.
Yeah. Okay, guys. So that's all for today, and see you next week.
دكتور
Yeah.
اي دكتور، هو انا اسفه، انا المايك بتاعي اللي كان مفتوح وانا ما كنتش واخده بالي ان اللاب بتاعي كان معلق، واصحابي هم اللي نبهوني على الواتساب، فانا بعتذر لحضرتك.
Yeah. Okay. Don't worry. Yeah. Okay, yeah.
شكرا يا دكتور.
Okay, guys. See you next time. Bye bye.